Thank you for joining me today, and also a big thank you to Scottish Autism for giving Bridges the opportunity to share with you our experience of partnering autistic children in their social learning. I'm Catherine Pownell, and I work with Mary Young. We're both speech and language therapists with Bridges, a small company that provides children with access to a social curriculum. We believe that equipping children with social understanding early builds confidence that enables them to be their authentic selves in a world that's different. Earlier this year, we met with one of the young adults we worked with as a child. We were talking about Bridges and the presentations we're now doing, and he said to us, "It's good to know you're sharing the curriculum we gave you." And he's right. What we're going to talk about in our two-part presentation, we learned from autistic children and their parents. At the time, the children were all in mainstream primary school, and they came to see us for social learning. While we drew on best practice, the latest research, it was partnering the children as they matured that provided us with a unique insight into social understanding from their perspective. First, let's look at what is social understanding. We can start by comparing it to the more familiar term, social skills. Social skills are the actions, the steps people use for interacting. They're based on social rules that help people get along. Social understanding is the way we think about people. We think about situations and events around us. It influences how we respond in our social interactions. Let's use going to Thailand as an example. It could be any country, but in Thailand, one of the social skills that's good to know cross-culturally is not to touch people's heads. But if you forget, it's a good idea to apologise. The social understanding that underpins this rule is that Thai people believe a person's head is sacred. Having that understanding helps us think about the situation from someone else's perspective. We know what to do and say so they feel okay, and that makes us feel good about ourselves. It's one of the reasons we buy a guidebook, before we set off on our travels. So, we've got that heads up. We want to be ourselves, but we also want to be confident we get along despite any differences cross-culturally. We don't want to feel embarrassed or stressed, and feeling like we don't know what's going on doesn't make any of us feel good. For the autistic children we partnered, going to mainstream school created a similar cross-cultural experience. They had a different way of thinking, and that meant they had to work very hard to process intellectually that hidden curriculum in a school day that everyone else understood intuitively. The children wanted to get along. They wanted to feel good about themselves. They hated feeling left out. Feeling like they didn't know what was going on didn't make them feel good. They got on with their schoolwork, but they often masked what was really happening, creating anxiety and affecting their self-esteem. There were active parent groups, working very hard, advocating for the children. They were building understanding and empathy in the community. Schools were modifying the environment to support the children's academic learning. But how were we supporting the children's understanding of that hidden social agenda? At that time, as clinicians, we took a responsive approach, supporting the children socially when we saw a need. In hindsight, a bit like asking someone to start driving and then pointing out anything they could do differently as they go along. Not our analogy, but it fits the approach. We focused on behaviours we could see, like conversation, but lacked the perspective to understand the depth and breadth of information that the children needed to know. They would try out what they were learning and come back to us with questions like, what do I do when I don't want to listen anymore? So it was the children and their parents who helped us see how complex the skills really were. Because we used to base our support on our observations, skills were developed in isolation without helping the children understand how these skills come together. Again, the parents fed back that the children were seeing joining in as having nothing to do with conversation, and they asked us if we could do something about it. We also covered complicated topics like conversation, but in too short a time, missing important information for the learning to be effective in real life. This affected the children's confidence in being themselves in neurotypical culture. What we saw with the older children is that they experienced anxiety, anger, or depression later in their school years. Looking beyond our own community of children and families, we can see other young adults with a shared experience. Josie Lowe, an autistic young person, wrote, "It's been over 3 years since I left high school at the age of 13. At the time, I was lost in a haze of anxiety and depression." Working with the children and parents we partnered, we were challenged to rethink what we were doing and ask ourselves the question, how could we partner autistic children in their social learning so they become advocates for their own lives? Josie puts in a nutshell what our children taught us. The need is for social information. It felt like everyone except me had been given a rule book that explained how social interaction works. We needed to remember that for autistic children, social understanding is learnt, not intuitive. It's also complex. One autistic adult said, "It's like breaking the Enigma code." The children taught us to engage in a shared learning process that recognises the way they think and learn. If we look at social understanding more logically, it's a little like maths, which is also a complex skill that is learnt rather than intuitive. When it comes to maths, teachers take a proactive approach. They don't wait until they see a need for fractions, nor do they teach fractions before addition. Children are provided with a systematic curriculum where each new skill connects to what's already been learnt. Things that matter take time, because children need maths for their adult life. For autistic children, we believe that social learning is just as important as maths. As clinicians, we've observed that understanding social interaction is best learnt in the primary years. Like maths, what worked for the children we partnered was sequential learning through a systematic social curriculum, where concepts and skills connect to what's already been learnt, enabling them to see that big picture. This took into account the children's unique thinking style, which was biased towards focusing on parts. being able to understand the learning process for themselves, they were more motivated to partner us in their own social understanding. The parents were the ones who challenged us to provide long-term learning, as they saw their children needed it in real life. They could see their children beginning to grasp the information we introduced, but had the insight to see that their children needed time to consolidate what they were learning. The parents were strong advocates that social understanding mattered. They believed that it would give their children resilience as adults. The children, who are now young adults themselves, have shared the positive impact of early social understanding on their relationships, their well-being, and their resilience. In an independent evaluation, they stated that understanding themselves equipped them with the confidence and self-determination for life's challenges. The group of extraordinary parents and children we partnered continue to be our greatest teachers. They taught us to recognise that the social difficulties experienced by autistic children are not fixed and not an inevitable part of their diagnosis. We really hope our sharing helps you advocate for early social understanding for your child before challenges with self-esteem and anxiety emerge, and engage them in long-term learning that enables them to be their authentic selves cross-culturally. In part 2 of our presentation, my colleague Mary will share the specific strategies we incorporated into the social curriculum that the children and their parents found effective. We hope you'll join us and find the strategies helpful for your child. Thank you for listening.